Have you ever wondered what would happen if the truth you've spent your whole life hiding suddenly came to light? For Margaret Hollingsworth, uncovering her father's darkest secret means losing everything: family, legacy, and the life she thought she controlled. But some truths are too dangerous to stay buried. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more powerful tales like this one. Your support keeps the stories coming. The church was silent, save for the faint rustling of the congregation as they prepared for the Sunday service. The old wooden pews creaked under the weight of the well-dressed crowd, all gathered to worship and escape their busy lives for a brief moment. The air was thick with incense, the smell of polished wood, and the soft murmur of prayers. Sitting in the front row, Margaret Hollingsworth, the CEO of Hollingsworth Enterprises, was ready to speak. The church, built in the 1800s, was the epitome of grace and tradition, much like the family that attended every Sunday. The Hollingsworth name was synonymous with wealth and influence in the city. Margaret was everything that society expected her to be, a powerful, polished woman who had clawed her way to the top. But as she adjusted her pearl earrings and straightened her suit, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off today. The church's choir had just finished their hymn, and now it was time for the children's performance. Margaret's eyes scanned the room, and her gaze fell upon the young girl at the front of the room. Her name was Emma, a poor girl from the nearby slums. Emma was a charity case, part of the church's community outreach program. She was known for being quiet and reserved, often seen with her head down and her hands clutching a crumpled piece of paper. Today, Emma had been chosen to deliver a poem. It wasn't something Margaret had expected, especially not from a girl like Emma. The Hollingsworths had a long-standing tradition of charitable work, but they had never taken much notice of the children in the outreach program until now. The congregation hushed as Emma stepped forward, her worn shoes clicking softly against the stone floor. Her dress was faded and her hair was unkempt, but there was something in the way she carried herself that made Margaret pause. There was a quiet strength in Emma's eyes, something far beyond her years. The young girl opened the crumpled paper and cleared her throat. "I was born in a world where hope is scarce," Emma began, her voice trembling but strong, "where the sun never seemed to shine and the darkness swallowed everything whole. But I found a way to see the light through words." Margaret frowned, her curiosity piqued. What was this poem about? Emma's words weren't just the naive musings of a poor child. There was something deeper, something that felt unsettlingly familiar. The poem unfolded, a tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and secrets buried so deep they could never be uncovered. As Emma continued, Margaret's mind began to race. She had never heard these words before, but somehow they felt like they were meant for her. A family divided by greed, hidden truths that no one can see. The past has a way of catching up, no matter how hard you try to escape. Each line of the poem seemed to tear at the fabric of Margaret's carefully constructed world. She shifted in her seat, her heart pounding. There was a sense of recognition, but from where? As the poem drew to a close, the congregation remained silent, as if afraid to speak the words they had just heard. Emma's gaze never left the paper, her eyes fixated on the words as though they held the key to something that only she could understand. When she finished, the room remained still. There was no applause, no words of encouragement, just the sound of collective breath held in suspense. Margaret's fingers gripped the edge of her pew. Something was terribly wrong. The poem didn't just speak of an abstract betrayal. It felt personal. "Thank you, Emma," the pastor finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was soft, but there was a hesitation that lingered in the air. "You've moved us all today." Emma nodded silently and returned to her seat, her face unreadable. But for Margaret, the world had shifted. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the words, of the girl, of the secret she was certain Emma knew. The service continued, but Margaret's thoughts were far from the sermon. As the pastor spoke of faith and forgiveness, Margaret's mind was already spinning, trying to figure out the connection between the poem and her own family. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Emma's words were more than just a child's creation. They were a warning. Little did Margaret know, this was just the beginning. The truth that Emma had stumbled upon, or perhaps had been forced to uncover, was far darker than anything she could have imagined. And it was all about to come to light. That night, as the wind howled outside the Hollingsworth mansion, Margaret couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in her bed, the haunting words of Emma's poem echoing in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the young girl standing at the podium, her voice unwavering as she recited lines that cut through the air like daggers. A family divided by greed, hidden truths that no one can see. Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that the poem wasn't just a random composition. There was something deeply familiar about the words, something that seemed to tie into the darkest corners of her past. The secrets she had buried for years, secrets that, up until this point, had remained locked away, were beginning to resurface. And Emma's poem seemed to hold the key. The next morning, Margaret sat at her kitchen table, the weight of her thoughts pressing heavily on her chest. She stared out the window, her coffee growing cold in front of her, as the realization began to settle in. There was no way the poem could have been written by accident. Emma was too young, too innocent to have crafted such a piece. And yet, it felt as though Emma had known something Margaret had spent her entire life trying to forget. Suddenly, Margaret's phone rang, jolting her out of her reverie. She glanced at the screen. It was her brother, Thomas. She hadn't spoken to him in weeks, not since their last heated argument over the family business. She hesitated before answering. "Margaret," Thomas said, his voice tense, "I need to see you. It's important." Her heart skipped a beat. What could he possibly want? Their relationship had been strained ever since their father passed away, leaving behind a fortune that neither of them was willing to share. The last thing Margaret wanted was another confrontation with Thomas, but something about his tone made her uneasy. She agreed to meet him in an hour, her curiosity getting the better of her. When she arrived at their childhood home, a large Victorian house tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, Thomas was waiting for her on the front steps. His usual polished appearance was absent. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes, those piercing eyes, were filled with worry. "Thomas, what is it?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. "I've been going through some old family records," Thomas said, his voice strained. "Something's not right. I found a letter, one that Dad wrote before he died. It was hidden away in the attic, in a box full of old papers." Margaret's pulse quickened. She had no idea what Thomas was talking about, but she could feel the significance of his words. She had long suspected that there were things her father had kept from her, things that had shaped the family's legacy. But to find a letter, what could it possibly say? "Read it," Thomas said, handing her the crumpled letter. His hands trembled as he released it into her grip. Margaret's eyes scanned the page, and as she read, a chill ran down her spine. The letter was brief, but its message was unmistakable. It was written by her father to someone named E.C., a name Margaret didn't recognize. In the letter, her father spoke of a betrayal, a secret that had been kept for years. He wrote about a child, a daughter, who had been born out of wedlock, someone who had been hidden from the world for the sake of family reputation. And then, the final line of the letter sent a jolt through Margaret's body. "Your sister is alive, but she doesn't know who she is." Margaret's mind reeled. Her father had a secret family. A sister, her sister. This couldn't be real. Her father, the man who had prided himself on family values, had kept this from her. But as the reality of the letter settled in, Margaret's thoughts turned to Emma. Could it be? Could the poor girl in church be the key to unlocking this family? Secret. Margaret, this isn't just about the business anymore, Thomas continued, his voice heavy with uncertainty. We need to find her. We need to know the truth. Margaret's heart raced. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was so much she didn't understand. Who was this girl? How could her father have kept something so important hidden from her all these years? And most importantly, why had Emma's poem seemed to call out the very secrets her father had kept buried? Emma? Margaret whispered, almost to herself. Thomas looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. What did you say? But Margaret didn't respond. Her thoughts were already racing ahead, plotting the next step in this dangerous game. She had to find Emma. She had to understand what the girl knew and how she was connected to the family's buried past. And so the hunt for the truth began. But what Margaret didn't know was that this search for answers would uncover far more than she was prepared to face. Margaret didn't waste any time. After her unsettling meeting with Thomas, she felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The hunt for the truth had begun, and she knew there was no turning back. Emma, the girl with the haunting poem, was the key to unlocking her father's secret, and Margaret would stop at nothing to uncover the truth. She spent the following days trying to track Emma down, but the search wasn't as easy as she had anticipated. The girl was elusive, almost as if she had vanished into thin air. She'd asked around the church, but no one knew where Emma lived. All the pastor could offer was that Emma came from a small neighborhood near the edge of town, a place that was known for its poverty and crime. Margaret was determined. She hired a private investigator, someone with the right connections and resources to get the information she needed. Hours turned into days, and still there was no sign of Emma. Margaret's frustration grew with each passing moment, and she began to feel the weight of the secret pressing down on her. One evening, as Margaret was going through the church's records at her office, she received a call from the investigator. "I've found her." The investigator's voice was tense, as if he too felt the gravity of the situation. "She's been living in a small, run-down apartment. It's in a neighborhood that's not exactly safe." Margaret's heart skipped a beat. She immediately asked for the address, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What would she find when she met Emma? Would the girl be willing to share what she knew? And how could Emma, someone so young and innocent, be tied to the dark secrets of her family? The next morning, Margaret drove to the address provided by the investigator. The neighborhood was nothing like the world she was accustomed to. The streets were littered with trash, and the buildings were old and decaying. The air felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of years of neglect and poverty. Margaret parked her car and stepped out, her heels clicking sharply on the cracked pavement. As she walked toward the building, she couldn't help but feel the sense of unease that had followed her ever since Emma's poem. The truth was close now, too close. She entered the building, making her way up a narrow, dimly lit staircase. The walls were damp, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. When she reached the 3rd floor, she paused in front of a door, marked with a faded number, 303. This was it. With a deep breath, Margaret knocked. The sound echoed in the stillness of the hallway. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Emma standing in the doorway. She looked much different than the girl Margaret had seen at the church. Her hair was tied back into a messy ponytail, and she wore a plain, oversized sweater. But it was her eyes, those dark, knowing eyes, that caught Margaret's attention. "Miss Hollingsworth," Emma said, her voice soft but unwavering. "I knew you'd come." Margaret was taken aback by the girl's calm demeanor. "I need to talk to you," Margaret said, trying to steady her breath. "About the poem, about your family." Emma stepped aside, allowing Margaret to enter the small apartment. It was sparsely furnished, with only a few chairs and a small table. The windows were cracked, and the curtains were drawn tightly shut, blocking out any semblance of light. "Sit down," Emma offered, gesturing toward a chair. "I know why you're here." Margaret hesitated for a moment before sitting down. She wasn't sure how to approach the conversation. How do you ask a girl about a family secret so dark, so hidden, that even her own father had gone to great lengths to keep it buried? "I don't understand," Margaret began, her voice barely a whisper. "How do you know about my family, my father?" Emma's gaze never left her. "I didn't know at first," she said, her voice steady. "But the poem, it came to me one night, just like the words you heard." "They weren't my words, Miss Hollingsworth. They were the words of someone else, someone from your past." Margaret's pulse quickened. "Who?" Emma hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting together. "It was your father. He wrote that poem years ago." Margaret's mind reeled. The weight of Emma's words crashed over her like a tidal wave. How could this be true? How could her father have written the poem that had exposed his deepest secrets? She tried to speak, but no. "Words came. I didn't know who I was until recently," Emma continued, her voice barely audible. "But I found out. My mother told me the truth. She said I was your father's daughter. I'm your sister, Margaret." The world seemed to stop. Margaret couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her father, the man she had idolized, the man who had built an empire, had a secret family, a family he had hidden from the world, from his own daughter. Margaret's mind whirled with disbelief. She had a sister, and this girl, Emma, was the result of that betrayal. The betrayal that had haunted her family for years. But it didn't end there. Emma wasn't the only one with secrets. There was something darker lurking beneath the surface, something that had been carefully buried, and now it was all coming to light. Margaret's hands trembled as she sat in the worn chair, absorbing the shocking truth Emma had just dropped on her. Her sister? How could this be? Her entire world, the carefully constructed empire her father had built, the family name she had worked so hard to protect, was beginning to crumble piece by piece. I don't understand," Margaret stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "How is this possible? Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Emma looked down at her hands, her face a mixture of sadness and determination. "I didn't know who I was until recently. I was just a child when I was left behind, hidden away. My mother didn't want me to be involved in your family's mess. She said I deserved better, but the truth has a way of coming out, Margaret, and I couldn't keep it hidden any longer." Margaret's heart was racing now, her mind grappling with the enormity of what she was hearing. The implications were far-reaching. If Emma was truly her sister, it meant her father had not only betrayed his family, but he had done so in the most painful, irreversible way. And all these years, Margaret had been blind to it. "But why the poem?" Margaret asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "How did you know about our family? Why would you choose that poem of all things?" Emma hesitated, biting her lip as if considering. Her next words carefully. "It wasn't just a poem to me, Margaret. It was a message, a warning. The poem was my way of telling you that I know the truth, and that you need to face it. There's more to this than you realize." Margaret frowned. "What more? What are you talking about?" Emma's eyes darkened as she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your father didn't just leave me behind, Margaret. He didn't just abandon me. He tried to erase me, erase my existence from your family's history. He buried the truth, not just from you, but from everyone. But the truth always finds a way to surface, and now it's here." Margaret's mind raced, the pieces starting to fall into place. She had always known her father wasn't a saint. There were rumors, whispers in the family business, but nothing concrete. He had built a legacy, a polished public image, but the truth was ugly. He had a secret daughter, a second family he had hidden away in the shadows. Margaret's heart ached at the thought of the years she had spent thinking she was the sole heir to his empire, only to discover that it wasn't the whole truth. "How do you know all of this?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. "Who told you?" Emma looked away, her expression conflicted. "My mother told me everything when I turned 16. She didn't want to tell me, but I found out. I demanded the truth. She said that your father had promised her a life, an escape, but he betrayed her too. He made promises he never kept." Margaret's eyes widened as the weight of Emma's words hit her like a ton of bricks. Her father's betrayal wasn't just about family. It was personal. It was about promises broken, lies told, and the price of those lies. Emma wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was a part of the wreckage, the aftermath of a broken man who had destroyed lives to protect his own reputation. "But why now, Emma?" Margaret asked, her voice full of both confusion and urgency. "Why bring this to me now? Why not before?" Emma met her gaze, her eyes filled with raw emotion. "Because your father isn't the man you think he is, Margaret. He's not the man he pretended to be. And now everything he built, the empire, the reputation, everything is at risk. I'm not the only one who knows the truth. There are others who have been waiting for the right time to expose him. Your father isn't the only one with secrets, Margaret. He's not the only one who's been hiding the truth." A cold shiver ran down Margaret's spine. Her father's empire, his life's work, was built on a foundation of lies, and now the walls were starting to crack. Emma wasn't the only one who knew the truth. There were others, hidden voices, buried histories, waiting for the right moment to come forward. Margaret stood up suddenly, the urgency of the situation hitting her with full force. "I need to know everything. I need to know who else is involved, and I need to know what your mother has told you about my father's past. Everything." Emma nodded, her face a mixture of fear and resolve. "You won't like what you hear, Margaret, but you need to hear it, and once you do, you'll have to make a choice." Margaret turned away from Emma, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The weight of the situation was suffocating. Her life, her family, everything she had worked so hard to protect, it was all built on a lie. And now, the truth was starting to come out. The secrets her father had buried for years were clawing their way to the surface. The moment of reckoning was near. Margaret knew there was no going back. She had to confront the truth, no matter the cost. But in doing so, she would have to make the hardest decision of her life, one that would change everything forever. Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was coming, the storm of truth, the storm that would tear apart everything she had ever known. Emma had told her enough to understand that her father's empire, the family legacy she had been so proud to protect, was built on lies and betrayal. But Margaret needed more. She needed the whole truth, and she needed it fast. Emma's words echoed in her mind as she drove back to her mansion that evening, her mind spinning with the weight of the revelations. "There are others who know the truth, Margaret. Your father isn't the only one with secrets." The question now was, who else was involved? Who else had played a role in this twisted family drama? And why had her father kept her in the dark for so long? She barely slept that night, her mind racing with questions. By morning she had made up her mind. She would confront her father's closest confidants, the ones who had been by his side for decades. She had to find out what they knew, what they were hiding. But she also knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just going to take their word for it. She had seen enough in her own family to know that people would lie, deny, and cover up until the very end. Margaret decided to meet with the family lawyer, Samuel Grayson, the man who had handled every legal matter for the Hollingsworths for over 30 years. If anyone knew the skeletons buried in the family closet, it would be him. She arrived at his office just before noon, the tall glass building reflecting the harsh sunlight. As she walked into the dimly lit room, the smell of old leather and paper hit her. Samuel was sitting behind his massive oak desk, his grey hair neatly combed, his sharp eyes glinting with the wisdom of years spent in the shadows of wealth and power. "Margaret," Samuel said, his voice warm but measured, "what brings you here today? You look troubled." Margaret didn't waste time with pleasantries. She went straight to the point. "I know about Emma. I know about my sister. I know what my father did, and I need to know everything. What are you hiding, Samuel? What did he keep from me?" Samuel's face tightened, and for the first time Margaret saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. He took a deep breath, as if weighing the decision to speak. "You're right to be asking these questions, Margaret," Samuel said quietly. "But the truth is, your father's actions have far-reaching consequences. There's more at stake here than just family secrets. There are people who will do anything to protect the Hollingsworth name, and some of them have been watching you very closely." Margaret's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? Who else knows?" Samuel leaned forward, his voice low. "Your father was involved in more than just personal betrayals. He made deals, Margaret, deals with people who don't forgive. And now that you're starting to uncover the truth, you've become a target. They won't stop until they make sure the past stays buried." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't just up against her father's legacy anymore. She was up against forces far darker than she could have ever imagined. The empire her father had built wasn't just founded on lies. It was also built on power, manipulation, and ruthless control. "And what about Emma?" Margaret asked, her voice trembling. "What role does she play in all of this?" Samuel's eyes shifted nervously. "Emma, your sister, is a key piece in this puzzle, Margaret. She's the final piece that could unravel everything. Your father wasn't just trying to protect his reputation. He was trying to erase any trace of Emma. She is the one thing that could destroy everything he worked for." Margaret stood up abruptly, her mind a whirl of emotions. "So what now? What do I do?" Samuel paused for a moment, his hands clasped in front of him. "You have a choice, Margaret. You can continue down this path, exposing the truth and risking everything, your family, your business, and your own safety, or you can let the past remain buried. But be warned, the longer you wait, the harder it will be to control the damage." Margaret's heart raced as she weighed her options. She had always prided herself on being strong, on keeping control of her life and her destiny, but now the ground beneath her felt like it was shifting. The truth was like a tidal wave, threatening to drown everything in its path. She couldn't walk away. Not now. She owed it to herself, to Emma, to everyone who had been affected by her father's choices, but the cost would be high. And Margaret wasn't sure if she was ready to pay it. "I'm going to finish this," she said finally, her voice steady with determination. "I'm going to find out everything, no matter the cost." Samuel nodded solemnly. "Then you need to be prepared for what's coming. The truth has a way of destroying everything in its path, Margaret, but sometimes it's the only way forward." Margaret left the office, her mind made up. The war for the truth had begun, and there would be no turning back. As she walked into the harsh light of the afternoon sun, she realized one thing. No matter how hard she tried to protect the Hollingsworth name, the truth would always have a way of surfacing, and when it did, it would change everything.